Breakfast host Fran Kelly joins us now in the studio. Fran, g'day.
Hello,
great to have
Joe.
you in the studio. It's our first chat for the year, so I want to take a bit of a broader look first off than what Scott Morrison is doing today on the economy. What did you make of his approach to the start of the new year, where he came back a couple of weeks ago, I think, and there was a lot of talk about Australia Day. What did you make of that approach to the very beginning of a big election year?
Well, there are many messages to be sent and many groups to be massaged before the election in May, Joe, and nothing like a quick and dirty little culture war to send a message to your Conservative base in particular. So I think with that, Prime Minister Scott Morrison, don't forget, he's still getting voters to really know what kind of guy he is. He's still got that job to do because he hasn't been in all that long as Prime Minister. But he's also got problems, particularly in Queensland, parts of WA, not so much with Labor particularly, but also with some of the Conservatives, minor parties and independents, One Nation in Queensland, for instance. So he's got to signal to those voters too who might be toying with leaving the Conservatives and heading to One Nation, no, stick with me, I'm on message with you.
Yeah, and so how did he handle that messaging? Because as you say, people are still getting used to him. He's still kind of getting used to the job a bit. What do you make of his approach and his expertise at sending that message?
Well, it's pretty blunt. It's pretty blunt, you know. It's Australia Day, you know. You can't wear your thongs and your singlet to the ceremony if you're going to your citizenship ceremony. That kind of talk, a lot of it was a message sent to resonate with a certain group of Australians. A lot of Australians, and this has been pointed out by many before me. A lot of Australians thinking, well, yeah, but why are we talking about this? Seriously, can you concentrate on what I'm interested in, and that's jobs, which he is talking about today, wages growth, getting my kids a good education, and their healthcare.
Yep, so he's turning the focus to the economy today. That speech is on in a couple of hours' time. The Coalition has a strong record on jobs, with that being achieving that 1 million jobs over the 4 or 5 years since the previous election. What's the wisdom of making a similar commitment now?
Well, I guess it's a big number, isn't it? 1.25 million jobs. It's a promise. It's not a policy per se. It's also really promising more of the same because, as you just said, Tony Abbott promised it. He made it. So it's not much different. So I'm not sure why he thinks above the headline people are going to be all that impressed by it. I think this government has to be careful of just counting too much on headlines and not having the policies to back it up. Remember, Malcolm Turnbull went to the last election with a promise of jobs and growth, and that certainly, you know, didn't persuade enough people to give them the buffer that they wanted and needed, which is why they are here now. But, you know, they're right, of course. It's always about the economy. It's the economy, stupid. And for many of us, it's always about jobs. But it's about wages too, and that's where Bill Shorten comes in.
Yeah, and so what else can Scott Morrison offer, do you believe, before the election to claw back that advantage with the opinion polls? Because the opinion polls are still showing, like, it looks like he's might have gained a bit of ground within the margin of error with that poll today. But how does he claw that territory back? Well,
I think what we see in the speech today is they've decided the best tactic is to scare people away from Labor. This is a speech he's given today, contains this promise of 1.25 million jobs, also to eradicate net debt by within 10 years. But it's about trying to scare people. You can't trust Labor with the economy. Seriously, how many elections have we gone to? I think it's straight out of the John Howard playbook. Will it work? Well, you know, Labor is reaping a lot of money from increased taxes, but it's targeting those increased taxes or eradication of tax benefits to the higher income earners. And as we heard Bill Shorten there, he's really directing his pitch at working class Australians, as he's called them, or middle income earners. So the government is trying to say, to quote Scott Morrison today on AM, Labor's trying to tax the Australian economy into oblivion. That's strong language. Will people buy it? I think it depends how well Labor can explain how they're going to spend that extra $200 billion. They reckon they're going to get into surplus and into eradicate debt earlier than Scott Morrison, and they're going to have money for better schools, better hospitals. So that's the ground we're going to be fighting this on. Don't forget, though, too, Joe, in the last, in my EFO, it's pretty clear the government is going to have a big spending spree in the April budget. It's going to have a lot of money there.
Or something?
$10 billion set aside there, and that's going to go, we think, probably in another tax cut and maybe one-off payments for pensioners. Again, out of the John Howard playbook.
Yeah. And we're seeing shots now of Bill Shorten in Queensland. What does his schedule indicate about his approach in this election year, with him already up there doing time in Queensland?
Bill Shorten spent most of last week in Queensland. The Prime Minister spending most of this week in Queensland. Really, it's been thought that Queensland is ground zero. There's a lot of marginal seats up for grabs. The government doesn't have much of a buffer, so it could be won and lost in Queensland. You see the Prime Minister today, I think it is, walking out through the electorate with Peter Dutton because, he's under pressure. There's a lot of focus in the seat of Dixon. So Queensland, I think we'll see both leaders up and back to Queensland a lot. But as we saw in the Victorian state election, the coalition's got work to do in Victoria too. So, it's going to be fighting on a few fronts. But Queensland, I think that's where a lot of effort's going to be spent.
And how does Bill Shorten effectively fight that attack from the government that the economy is headed for, or not recession, but a much weaker economy if Labor takes the reins?
Well, Christopher Pyne, when asked, said Labor will bring you to recession. The Prime Minister, as we heard, didn't want to go that far today, and neither he should, really, because it's not responsible for governments to be talking like that. Well, they're just going to keep saying what they're saying and keep making their messages. Yes, we are cutting back tax benefits, but they're ones that are enjoyed by wealthy Australians. We're not for the big end of town. That's Labor's mantra. The government's going to try and offset that by saying we've got tax cuts for all and more jobs for all.
And there's been a lot of talk about the independents in the wake of the Kerryn Phelps victory in Wentworth. Talk us through some other seats where independents might come into the picture.
Well, we saw the news yesterday with the skiing champion Ali Stegel in Warringah taking on Tony Abbott. She describes herself as a small L Liberal. She's got some strong backing. She's a local. That's attracted a lot of national headlines because everyone's been waiting, I suppose, to see who was going to come out against Tony Abbott. So far, there's 3 independents. She has the highest national profile, I think, and the strongest backing at this point. Tony Abbott is seen as vulnerable because of the result in Wentworth. If it can happen in Wentworth, where else can it happen? Warringah may be a similar seat. And then today we've got Oliver Yates. He's a long-time Liberal member. His dad was a Liberal politician. He was the chair of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, was executive director, I think, of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. He's also making a play. He's going to throw his hat in the ring in Kooyong against Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. Labor thinks there's some vulnerable seats for the coalition in Victoria. Oliver Yates is obviously making the same equation, doing the same sums and coming up with the same answer. He too is focusing very much on climate change, which is where Kerryn Phelps went. It's when Sally Steggall's gone. So I think there's a perception that small L Liberal voters in some of these inner suburban seats are really unhappy with some of the Conservative policies and the messaging coming from the Liberal Party at the moment, and they're ready to send a message.
Yeah. And so what's the likelihood that a few more of those independents will actually get up? Do you think, what's a margin that Josh Frydenberg is sitting on?
Josh Frydenberg, look, I think his margin is 12%. You'd think he's sitting very pretty at the moment. I think it would be a big call to say that he's vulnerable to Oliver Yates, but it's the last state election showed that things had changed in some of those Liberal heartland seats in the inner suburban electorates around Melbourne. So I think there will be movement against Josh Frydenberg. He might be buffered by the fact that he was the one who came up with the National Energy Guarantee within the coalition, who was seemed to be doing most to come up with a policy on climate change. That might give him a bit more protection. Tony Abbott, I think you'd have to say, even though he has a margin of 11%, is probably more vulnerable if the small L Liberals in that electorate have made up their mind that they're not happy and they want to change.
And what about that mess in Gilmore? We had Katrina Hodgkinson in here this morning saying that she's keen to put her hand up if the Nationals put up a candidate. What did you make of, how was that a reflection of the way that Scott Morrison can handle things as a leader?
Well, it didn't seem to be handled very adroitly. Certainly the locals got their nose out of joint, but it could be, who knows, it could work for the government if Katrina Hodgkins does put up her hand. There's a three-corner contest then that was allowed under the rules of the coalition agreement, and it might mean that those local Liberals who just won't vote for Warren Mundine because their local candidate was dumped so unceremoniously, and they're pretty angry about that, but it gives them another Conservative in that election to vote for. So then the preferences could come back. So that could, in a way, protect, if you like, Warren Mundine and the Liberals in that seat. But we'll see.
Yeah, so it's a big year for political reporters. You're looking forward to it.
I am looking forward to it. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of surprises, a lot of things like these announcements we've seen. Oliver Yates today, no one was necessarily counting on that. There might be some more of that, I think, as people see the coalition is vulnerable. We've also, of course, seen those announcements of ministers leaving. The Prime Minister says, well, they've all got good reasons, family reasons. I'm sure they do. But there's nothing like front benchers leaving to, make everyone go, oh, rats leaving a sinking ship. It's psychologically, it's just another front that the Prime Minister has to fight on and another perception he's got to get over before people start listening to the real message he's putting out there, which, as we saw today, right now, is jobs.
It's coming. OK, Fran, great to have a chat to you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Joe. See you again.
Now, as we just mentioned, former New South Wales Minister Katrina Hodgkinson has confirmed her interest in running for the marginal seat of Gilmore in the federal election. She says she's been in talks with the National Party to enter a three-cornered contest to take on Liberal candidate Warren Mundine, who was parachuted into the seat by Prime Minister Scott Morrison last week. She says her interest is unrelated to the Liberal Party and her main focus will be on local issues.
The Nationals will consider which seats they're going to be nominating for. There's a due process that takes place, and it's certainly not one that's reactionary or measured against what other political parties may or may not be doing. So that process is currently underway, and they'll be making an announcement on that when they're ready. But yes, I am very interested in nominating should the opportunity occur for the electorate of Gilmore. It is an absolutely beautiful electorate and one which I'm very attached to. So I'm very much looking forward to hopefully having the opportunity, but of course, whatever the Nationals end up deciding, I will abide by.
But there are all sorts of allegations flying around at the moment. The state, that the locals put forward one person for the Liberals. The state executive came in and overturned it. Then there are locals who are tearing up their membership of the Liberal Party. It's a real mess in terms of that. Why do you want to go into that on the Conservative side of politics when there's so much vitriol going around locally?
Well, other political parties will do what they do. They're a long way from what we do in the Nationals. We're very measured with the Nationals, and the state executive will take their time and make the proper decision for the seat of Gilmore, as it will for all the seats around New South Wales. The New South Wales division will look after that. But what other political parties do and what other candidates do is I'll let them comment on that themselves.
Yeah, so you're not going to offer a comment on what you thought about the feds coming in and taking over the locals on the Liberal side of politics there?
Well, if I'm given the opportunity to nominate to run for the seat of Gilmore, then my focus will be totally on the constituency, the people on the ground, the issues that matter, and how people are feeling and what they want from their local Member of Parliament. That will be my focus. I won't be focused on other candidates or other political parties. I've been a Member of Parliament in the past, and that's always been my attitude towards an election. Just get on with the job and do your best, put your best foot forward and let the others deal with themselves.
So the Nationals seem to have been a bit hesitant about sorting this out, where they're going to put up a candidate. Why is that the case?
No, they just go through a process. And so there is a strict process that the Nationals go through, a procedure which involves the state executive of the New South Wales division. They have their meeting dates set at a particular time, and they take a very measured approach.
Yeah. And don't you risk splintering the Conservative vote if you put your hand up as well?
Well, no, as I said a moment ago, I believe very much in looking after the local constituency for the electorate that I'm running in, and I'll be really focused on the voters and what the voters want to see achieved in the local area.
And what's your personal connection to that area?
Well, my husband was born in the area. I do have a place in the electorate of Gilmore in Nowra. I've got 2 properties within a short drive of the boundary, which are usually within the boundaries of Gilmore itself.
Katrina Hodgkinson there. Weeks after triggering voter backlash for sending out mass unsolicited text messages, Clive Palmer is again embroiled in controversy, with the ABC revealing that an app produced by his United Australia Party